You are listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. Thank you for downloading and subscribing. Coming to you virtually live from high atop the historic Raleigh building in beautiful downtown Raleigh. The NC F&B takes the listener behind the scenes to tell the stories of the people that contribute to the creation of the food and beverage community of North Carolina. And now, the misfits in the dish pit, the faces of the front. They are Max Trujillo and Matthew Weiss.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. I am your co-host, Max Trujillo.
And I am your co-host, Matthew Weiss. And folks, Papa John's got slaughtered by the samurai sword of Papa Shogun. The new, not so new anymore, but one of the coolest restaurants in Raleigh. From Papa Shogun, we have the chef and owner, Tom Cuomo. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Appreciate you guys having me here.
It's an interesting intro, Matt. Very nice.
I tried.
So chef, you are you're kind of new to town, but not yet. You've been here for a minute.
We've been here for a little while. We moved down here. My wife and I moved down here a few years ago. Started working at Mateo in downtown Durham while we were searching for a spot to open, and kind of fell in love with Raleigh while we were doing that, and decided this was going to be the place for us.
Nice. Well, funny that you mentioned that, because I like to kind of paint a picture of the times and things that we've done. And Matt and I did fun things this weekend, and one of which was being served some dank-ass bomb
goodness.
food by Matthew Kelly, the aforementioned Matthew Kelly, as he popped up with some friends at
Cucina
24.
224?
No, I think it's 24.
Okay.
But Cucina 24, and it was just wild. I mean, it ended up being kind of a fun who's who of a bunch of famous to our town's chefs, and it was fun. But we were in Nashville for the Chow Chow food event, and that was a Saturday night, and it was you could probably legally fit 7 people in there, and there were like 27 people in.
Yeah, with great little craft cocktails, Lambrusco Negroni, and a regular Negroni, and then some of the best food. I'm not one to hyperbolize, but I think there were some of the flavors that were the best I've ever personally tasted.
Yeah.
Nice. Do you guys remember what Matt served you?
Matt was doing this really cool Alpine-style technique where he takes a big hunk of cheese, a big wheel of cheese, under a very tiny heater. You might know exactly what I'm talking about, but it's cradled under a heat lamp, effectively. And after the cheese has melted down for a good while, then he swings the cheese his way and scrapes the top of the cheese off onto a crushed baked potato, if you will, or a crushed potato. And he said it's like, I think he said something about to the effect of it was the glue that keeps you warm up in the mountains or something. But basically it was just like a cabin, like a ski cabin type of dish.
Yeah.
And it was ridiculous. Simple as it is, but totally delicious.
Yeah, all the food was simple, but it was just unbelievable.
I think Ashley made it's actually in her cookbook, because we were like looking around, wait, we've seen this before, but just threw down some field peas in a bowl, just brought it in. It was like a potluck. It was just funny. She's like, here you go, and just threw these down. And then Matt also had done something with
that crusted
cigarette,
oh yeah, that. But is that it was so simple, but he just made this like perfectly toasted bread that was so crunchy, and then it was like
it was a tomato
warm
sauce and a cream sauce.
Yeah. No, well, it was like a mozzarella, I think, on top of the tomato sauce. But I don't know. It was just like you would know the perfect melding of flavors.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple food is in my opinion, some of the best, only because it's you got nothing to hide behind. You either nailed it or you haven't, both on the technique side, the balance of flavors, everything, and like it's there or it's not.
Well, that's a good segue into your cooking, because it's not exactly simple. So for those listening outside of the Triangle who haven't heard about you yet, you do, for lack of a better term, a Japanese-Italian fusion.
Yeah, and we all know how, the negative connotations with that word fusion, as we being children of the 90s, and how that was just, how that got such a bad rep. But yeah, I mean, that's basically what we try to do. I mean, we try to meld the techniques and the flavors of both cuisines.
And was that the intention all along when you knew you wanted to open that type of restaurant? Or it's like, no, this is what, after kind of going through the motions and I mean, we'll get to your resume in a bit. It's very impressive, having worked with the likes of Wylie Dufresne and, as you mentioned, Matt Kelly and some others. But was that the intention all along?
Yeah, because I mean, the idea really came about when I was working for Wylie Dufresne, and like, you know, that was kind of where I started to see the through lines, where I started to see how the two cuisines can actually come together on the same plate.
Okay.
So that was really where it started. So that's, you know, at this point, 12 years ago, I think, when I was there.
Yeah.
And so that's really where I started to see it. And really at that point, it was just like, fuck, that's when I open up a restaurant, like that's what I'm going to do.
You had an aha moment.
Yeah.
We love those on this show. So what was the dish?
It was honestly, it was nothing. There was no dish in particular. We had such a heavy Japanese influence at WD-50 when I was there at the time, because, you know, Wylie just loved so many things Japanese from a cooking perspective. And so it became just like so ingrained in the culture of WD-50 at that time period, and it became just something that I played with on a daily basis. And me being from a heavily Italian background, it all of a sudden just literally like something clicked as we were playing, as I would play with different Japanese techniques for dishes that we were already doing on the menu. It was just like, this is really similar to something that like my mom always did. Or this flavor profile, I could just like substitute, this particular Italian ingredient in here, and it'll still work, and it'll be delicious.
We're all not too different from each other, are we? from all around. To paint a picture too, for those that don't know who Wylie Dufresne is, simply put, I mean, he would I be wrong in saying he's kind of a master of molecular gastronomy? Kind of pushes.
He was really the first guy in this country doing it for the most part. I mean, he started with like 71 Clinton Street, which ultimately failed. Probably because it was too far ahead of its time. And then had great success with WD-50, obviously, and great notoriety.
If you watch Top Chef or so, he's many times a judge, and all the chef contestants that are on are usually just like are in awe of him.
Yeah.
They have no idea how to wrap their mind around the concepts that he's coming up with, and then cooking for, say, a person like him is completely intimidating. So I would like to know that. Like, I'd like to know how you were fitting into that kitchen, and how did that work? Did you seek him? Did you go like, I got to work for this guy?
Yes, pretty much.
Yeah.
When I first heard about him, like early on, I don't even remember when it was. I was just like, man, like that's the guy that I have to work for. And I was, my first real fine dining foray was at 11 Madison Park. I don't generally say that I worked there or I put it on my resume because I only stayed for like 6 weeks.
Well, it's like Matt at Per Se.
What's that?
It's like Matt over here at Per Se.
I famously worked at Per Se for 2 weeks.
I was there for 6 weeks, and after like a month, I was like, guys, I'm leaving. Like, here's my 2 week notice, because a job opened up at WD-50. I'd originally applied there. They didn't have an opening. And then like the chef de cuisine at the time, John Vignelli, like reached out to me and was just like, hey, you still looking for a job? I was like, fuck yeah, I'm still looking for a job. I'm going.
Especially there. So because, and Matt and I were talking about this before, but molecular gastronomy, of course, it's very scientific based, right? And it's very precise. There's a lot of creativity involved, but it's not your traditional practices of what you do in a kitchen. So is this something from a childhood standpoint where have you always been involved in like science and these type of levels, or why did this appeal to you so much?
No, I was terrible at science. Pretty good at math, but on the science end, no, just absolutely awful. It wasn't so much that aspect that appealed to me. It was literally just the creativity and the techniques that he was using. And I always liked the idea of working in a non-cuisine specific technique driven restaurant. And that's also like kind of where we draw our inspiration for Papa Shogun. I mean, theoretically or in practice, we are cuisine specific. If Italian Japanese were a cuisine, but everything that we do is it's Italian in its nature, or it's Japanese in its nature. So I look to those cuisines, and some of their more traditional dishes for inspiration for the dishes at Papa Shogun. But ultimately, I view it as a technique-driven restaurant.
Okay.
And so that's really what I saw WD-50 as. It's a technique-driven restaurant because, the whole idea, and I've said this to other people, in my mind, America is the great melting pot. And so there's no reason why I can't take, a technique from Japan with a flavor profile, say from Italy, with vegetables that are, American, and put that on the same plate and call that American cuisine, because that's really what it is, because that's what America is.
Yeah.
In my opinion. And so it's, so working at WD-50, getting exposed to these techniques, or getting exposed to a more technique-driven cuisine was always something that I wanted to do.
I like that because it's like intentional molecular gastronomy, whereas sometimes, and Max, I know you've talked about this, and we won't name names, but like some people, some chefs do it more as just a show, where it's like we were talking about earlier, it's maybe more hiding something, like the food isn't that great, so you have to do like a show to make it better.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes chefs will they'll let the technique get in the way of the flavor, and it's almost like you want to show off your new toy, like, hey, look, I learned how to work with liquid nitrogen, or check out this immersion circulator thing I'm doing, or I've done, like, I just found out that tapioca maltodextrin is a thing, and I want to use it and stuff. It's like, okay. That's like kiddingly, and we've actually made fun of Frank Fronda. Matt and I are all chef back when we worked together in Los Angeles, and Frank was like whipping salmon. He was messing around with it, and he used agar to do these like little like cubes of salmon, and they look like ice cubes. I don't know, maybe you weren't working there at the time, Matt.
I don't remember that,
but good old Jason Klein and Ben Philpott, who are the two chefs, and Ben Philpott, of course, out here in Charlotte. We were all messing around, and Frank just said, I want to make cubes of salmon, and I want to put them on like little toasted crackers with some sour cream and some chives, and just kind of do like a really traditional Jewish dish. And we thought, okay, that sounds cool. And then we tried it, and it was like I almost yacked. I was like, oh my God. We're like, this is the one that you're not going to put out. This is the one we're just going to chalk up to. That was an experiment gone wrong. It just sometimes flavor and texture. I mean, that's the end result, right? It's got to taste great. That's
exactly.
Most
I mean, that was always the thing, and that was it was just a matter of like all of the food always had to taste good. Anytime we were doing like a new, or anytime I was doing a new dish for Wylie, for example, it would literally be like, you had to like check your boxes down the line. The last box was always, what else? So it was always like, these flavors go together, these textures work, now what else?
Right.
So there was always that what else element, but you had to figure out how to seamlessly integrate that into the dish, because that's what it was. I mean, all of his cooking, or all of our cooking there, was rooted in classic French technique for the most part. But there was always that what else element, like how else can we play with this?
Yeah, I like that
more?
aspect. Ultimately, the baseline you start with, does it taste good? Do the flavors work? And then can we do something even more just to be a little bit different, a little bit cutting edge?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, because there was written about in the Indie article, the review that came out, which, by the way, is a great review. Super honest. I don't know, obviously you have your own feelings about, but ultimately he pointed out, and this is Nick Williams, the reviewer, about that this has some historical basis of Itameshi,
yeah,
which I guess was at the late stages of the 19th century, where some notable Japanese cooks started in fusing Italian ingredients and doing their own take on that. So is some of that based on Itameshi, or is that just a coincidence?
I didn't necessarily look to that for inspiration, but it provided validation. In a way. So it's just like, not only do I have this idea that these things are going together, and I had never heard of anybody else thinking of it at the time.
Right.
But I was like, but there's this whole history of Itameshi cuisine where it's, Italian food, but they're using their history, their culinary history to produce it. So it ends up being a different product.
Right.
And so even some of So in the end, so now I should say I do now look sometimes to that for, how can I take that dish and make it my own, or that idea and make it my own, like classic Itameshi dishes, like our linguine umeshiso. It's a classic Itameshi dish.
How does that work?
It's basically it's a linguine dish that you start off your sauce just with garlic, sometimes a little bit of spice as well, and then it's literally ume, which is a pickled, cured plum, but technically it's in the apricot family, and shiso. So it's just a super simple sauce of those basic components.
Wow.
And then we look to what local farmers are producing at any particular time, and we change some of the components in that dish, but the root of it is still ume and shiso.
I love it. And where what I wonder is what wines would pair with that dish. But I will tell you where you can find a wine that will pair with that dish. That would be the Triangle Wine Company.
That's right, Matt. Go to Triangle Wine Company. They've been great sponsors of the North Carolina Food and Beverage podcast. And we like working with them because they put out a serious product. They have a crazy beer selection, hard to find bar items as well, like the vermouths and the bitters and all. And then, of course, as it would imply in their name, their wine selection is pretty amazing. 4 locations: Holly Springs, Morrisville,
Southern
Perry,
Pines.
and Southern Pines. Thanks, Matt.
Use the NCFB promo code and you will receive a discount whether ordering online or going to one of their 4 locations and buying something in store.
You are famously known, especially in these parts, because like Raleigh Magazine just talked about how you had one of the 25 best dishes in town, but specifically talking about your chicken Parm-Ramen. And I know our friend Steve Mangano of the Curate app, he looked at me like I was an idiot because I hadn't A, gone to your place yet, and B, hadn't had the chicken Parm-Ramen yet. He's like, what the hell are you waiting for? What? They've been open. Why aren't you not there?
Why could you possibly not have gone yet?
There are no other things in life that you could be doing other than having that. So ultimately, I did go. Talk to us a little bit about the chicken Parm-Ramen, because that was different. I had not experienced that before.
Yeah, we actually run a pretty traditional like ramen base for that. It's tori paitan. Tori is chicken, paitan meaning doesn't literally translate, but it's like a creamy broth. And so there's no dairy in it, other than the cheese, of course, on the chicken. But it's about the texture of the broth. And so basically we took that idea, ran it with a bunch of tomatoes and just kind of classic Italian, what you would associate with like a chicken parm, spices and seasonings to create kind of a unique flavor profile in the broth. It was just one of those things that made sense. And it came ultimately as well from our tonkatsu milanese, which was, both cultures, we have a breaded, fried, pork product. One of them gets, like an arugula salad with like lemon. The other one gets a katsu sauce, which is not dissimilar from a tomato sauce anyway.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of made sense. Well, chicken parm will use katsu sauce and mozzarella, and that will figure out how to incorporate like a really Italianized version of a tori paitan.
Yeah.
And noodles are noodles
Yeah.
on some level as well. I mean, they have different textures, they have different roles as a result of that. In the end, that's kind of what it was. I mean, it wasn't like I was trying to like break any molds with it, and it turned out to kind of.
Yeah, you kind of redefined that whole flavor profile there. And even friend of our show, and he's just around the corner in the studio, Chef Bobby McFarland. He and Kyle Fletcher, when we were developing the menu over at Wyhill, those guys spent a lot of time at your restaurant. Like, they just kept going back, and they're like, oh my God, man, he's just freaking me out. He's like doing all these other things. The Kombu gnocchi that you have done, he said he thinks that might be the greatest thing he's had on your menu. And
yeah, Kyle in particular, really, he was just like, the texture on this, he's just like, this is perfect. Like, how do you get this?
Yeah, and it was inspiring. That's, I think, what's important is that chefs need to help each other, whether it's just by example or inspiration. I think they were just loving the idea of taking a style of food from a certain area and then seeing how can we replace a lot of these ideas. And so they even came up with their own version of a chicken saltimbocca that they're doing that's more southern inspired, and basically they took every ingredient you would do from a traditional Italian saltimbocca and just replace it with something that's more on the nose here in the South. And in the end, it might be the best dish they put on the menu. But I know that all the R&D was happening while dining so frequently at Papa Shogun. So there are tones of your style, even just infectious in other chefs' menus. But.
That's also like the best compliment that anybody in this industry can receive when you put something out there and other people in the industry, look to it and be like, wow, that's awesome. Like how can I do something like that? And that's, like I said, that's the best compliment that any of us can receive.
Well, perfect segue, because I am genuinely wondering what beverages pair with this food like this. That's got to be a trip. I think your wife helps out, you were saying, with some of those, but yeah, what does your beverage program look like?
Well, we only carry wine and beer.
Okay.
And so anytime that, because we are a small restaurant, I basically look to wines and beers that are more workhorses than anything else. And so I approach our wine and beer selection more from the idea of, general flavor profiles.
Okay.
And so, there are certain wines that pair perfectly with some of the dishes. But unfortunately, because of my limited space, I kind of have to look at, okay, this wine's going to go pretty well with about half the menu.
Sure.
And then every once in a while it'll be like, okay, but I try to find a wine that it pairs awesome with this particular dish and then goes pretty well with kind
others.
of the with most of the rest.
Well, just let's take it, for example, the chicken parm dish, because traditionally with chicken parm, you'd want something like heavy and lush, like a Sangiovese, a little spicy, because it's such with the red sauce and the cheese. It's a heavy dish. So, but then you have these Japanese delicate flavors and spices and the noodles and the ramen. So it's like, what are you finding that works with that dish?
Exactly like you just said, a Sangiovese.
Okay,
works awesome with it.
Okay.
Also, we just brought in a Valpolicella Ripasso that is not part of what we do with our beers and wines as well, is to try to find things that a lot of people aren't carrying. So whenever I reach out to like my wine guys, I'm always just like, this is what I'm looking for in terms of like, this is where the menu's going. Let's come up with some wines that do that fit with that, and who else is carrying it in downtown?
Right.
because if no one's carrying it, then I want it.
Yeah.
Whatever. And so because the wine and beer list kind of has to match the uniqueness of the food, in my opinion. So we just brought in this Valpolicella Ripasso from the guys over at Haw River Wine, and it was awesome because it's not an oaked.
Yep.
It's not an oaked Valpolicella Ripasso, so it doesn't have a lot of tannin on the back end, and it's super fruit forward, and so
as a Ripasso should be.
Yeah, exactly. But there's not, so it's got depth that you would associate, but it's lacking other things that we would associate with the Valpolicella Ripasso that might overpower some of the more delicate flavors.
Yeah.
That we use.
I'm going to go ahead and say, champagne goes with anything, but like super dry champagnes or any dry method champenois sparkling wines. Because
I bring in and I have a which is, it literally goes with almost the entire menu. I've got this awesome Aglianico that's done in a classic champagne method.
Oh wow!
And then it's bottle aged for 9 years.
Oh wow!
As well, and
9 years.
9 years, yeah, bottle aged for 9 years. So right now we have the 2009 vintage.
Damn,
which is pretty.
That
pretty
winery is definitely having a passion project, or they must pump out some other inexpensive juice to keep the lights on. Jeez,
yeah,
9 years.
It's well, what's crazy too is how inexpensive. I mean, with your knowledge, you would know what a champagne would cost,
of course,
at that price point, and you're able to get this wine retail for like in the 40s if anybody actually carried it.
Yeah.
That's not terribly expensive.
Yeah.
No, not at all. And we try to keep our wine prices on the lower end.
It's funny, and you think like beer, and I'm just thinking about generically Italian beer and Japanese beer lagers are really an important aspect of both Peronis, Morettis, but then, in Italy, and then you've got your Asahis and your Kirin Ichibans and all, and Sapporos. The weight of them are all very similar. So I wonder, I bet like you could easily cross over. I think when I was having lunch at your place, I had a Moretti, possibly, and I had that with everything, and it's really an experience. And so your place, for those that are trying to figure it out, it's in the old Kimbap location there in the Seaboard Station. So it's cozy. It's a small restaurant. How many seats is it?
28.
28, yeah. So it's intimate, but you can go in there lunch and dinner. It's what we need here in Raleigh and in North Carolina, is bringing on more people that understand. It's literally like, I just put this article that's going to come out next week in the Raleigh Magazine, and it's about this concept of like, are we getting big enough to where now celebrity chefs are coming to our town now? Like, we have arrived enough to where they can make a buck, but also they want to be here. There's an image, there's a cool factor of what we're doing here. And the good part about it is we're getting so much more diversity of flavors, and also compounding on top of it, we're not just getting the one good Italian joint or the one good Chinese joint. It's like, no. Now we have like 7 or 8 to choose from, and there's a different take on all of it because it's such a vast flavor profile in general. And then with you're taking a couple of them and then creating a whole new idea.
Max, you were the master of segue today. I just want to give you the props for that. Which leads me to my next question. We didn't really get into it, why you chose this area. I mean, I know you came down and were working for Matt Kelly, but did you come down for the job, or you came down and then the job happened?
No, I came down more for family than anything else. My brother had lived down here already for a bunch of years.
I see.
And so
Is he in the business? Or?
No, he's not.
Okay.
I'd been coming down to visit him pretty regularly. I mean, the nature of being in this industry, you get like a week off a year maybe,
right?
And so I would usually take that week and come down here and visit.
Oh wow!
In doing so, I started just eating at the restaurants. I think I ate at Mateo in the first year that it opened. In fact, I know that I did, and that was the year that my brother had moved down here. And basically, him just harping on me to move down because we like to be near each other anyway, and we had never really he's 7 years older, and we had never really lived in the same area for any extended period of time. I mean, we overlapped in LA for a little bit, we overlapped in New York for a little bit. In eating just the food down here, it was kind of like I had been so insulated in New York and also in LA when I was out in LA for a few years, and then realizing all of the cooler stuff that's happening, and honestly just fell in love with the restaurant scene and was just like, okay, like we're gonna move down there.
Nice. I think that's the way it happened for a lot of us, certainly me.
And I think what you're saying is we can both appreciate is that there's almost like these big city bias of if you're going to do it, you can only do it here type of thing. Like if you're going to make a name for yourself, you got to be here. But I think that's going away because of the internet and Instagram and podcasts and whatever. Everything just blurs the line now. Now it's just and even just travel, like airfare is so cheap, right? So it's like, oh, you want to get the best hot chicken ever? Okay, well then go fly to Nashville. It's like, you want to get some really good ribs, like Austin style ribs? Well, just go to Austin. Just go and do that. And I think that there's, for the foodies in this world, that no longer is a barrier. It's like, no, just go and then support those when you are there. And everything's like this microclimate of food. And definitely you going to Mateo was probably a really smart thing to do when first coming to the Triangle, because Matt Kelly is kind of throwing down. We both know Matt really well.
I don't know about really well that much. For myself, I don't know.
Does anyone really know Matt Kelly?
That's a good question. Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, I worked for him for almost 2 years, and I don't know him.
Yeah.
Matt, you are an international man of mystery.
Yeah, but we love the food that you make. It's crazy. What's something that you think that you might have picked up along the way during that time you're working over at Mateo, famously a Spanish tapas restaurant?
Yeah, but he is, the tagline of the restaurant, right, is Spanish heart, Southern soul. And so he is doing,
almost fusion.
He's doing fusion.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, like that's, we had, I think, we had one of our we had a review in News and Observer.
Yeah.
He made it sound like fusion is its own cuisine, and when I read that, because I'm always surprised that, or not surprised, but you can always learn something new. I had never thought of like fusion as being its own cuisine necessarily, and he made it sound in such a way that fusion is its own cuisine, and that's what Matt's doing, like at Mateo.
But for the consumer, you do have to quantify that, right? Like you can't just say, oh, it's a fusion restaurant because, well, maybe most people think, oh, I think when I hear fusion, I probably hear like American and Japanese, but you're not doing American and Japanese in an aspect of it. So I think that's the thing is you do have to go one step further. You can't just say fusion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why you do specify in that regards. And so what he is though effectively doing though, like I said, like a fusion cuisine of Spanish and Southern food, because that's where we are, and that's where his inspiration there come from both places as a result.
And it makes so much sense, and I think that's what sets our region apart. It's we have this bounty of agriculture,
absolutely,
of this unbelievable produce that really sets our state apart, and I think that's why chefs, not just in the Triangle, but all around our state, are being so successful because they have the availability of this amazing produce, and then they're putting it into action in their menus.
Yeah, and it's great. One can even make that argument that, say, like in talking of fusion, our very own out here in Raleigh, Chidi Kumar, she obviously cooks with an Indian inspiration or background, but she's very akin to the region, so she's cooking with local flavors. So even that in itself, it's not like she's trying to be exactly authentic as the way, say, her great-grandmother might have cooked. She's like, no, I'm doing what I'm doing here in this region, and my evolution of what all the things I know, given also the region I'm cooking in, is the food I'm making. So from the outside looking in, sure, it's Indian-ish-esque, if you will, but you get in there and the menu, like, it's not what you would expect. It's more. It's something different. So before we get out of here, though, Chef, I was actually initially contacting you because I wanted you to do our little pre-run of the Chef Showdown with the NCRLA. You're going to compete along with some other chefs on September 30th at Bay 7 in Durham. But as the coordination was going on, it kind of just more made sense to have you come into studio since you're so close to do this entire show. But all that said, how'd you get involved and affiliated with the Chef Showdown?
Honestly, I heard about it through our PR, Tabletop Media.
Kristen,
Kristen, and she's awesome, and she got me hooked up with that. There was an application process where I had to basically talk about myself over the course of a couple of pages of questions and things like that.
Doing that.
I hate talking about myself, but hey, talked about just kind of like where the inspiration comes from and our focus on using as much local product as we can, and our partnership particularly with places like Veraluce Farm, which is out in Hillsborough, who, by the way, and I'm coming from New Jersey, he grows some of the best tasting tomatoes I've ever had in my life.
We got to get
and that's
him on
saying
the
a
show.
lot.
Famously, his brother is Daniel Benjamin over there at Lucette Grace, and what a great family to come from with all of that skill coming in both from the farm and in the bakery.
It's amazing. They're an amazing, and they're an amazing group, and he's an amazing farmer. Him and his wife out there, and it's just the two of them doing it. So like I kind of draw I find that kind of fun to work with because it's another husband-wife duo just doing it.
Yeah. So is your dish that you're preparing for the Chef Showdown using Veraluce tomatoes?
No. So we're using melons from Veraluce Farm.
Oh, okay.
And so I went for a play on like classic Italian prosciutto and melon. But instead of utilizing a pork product, we draw a lot of our kind of cured, fermented from Japanese products in the dish.
Okay.
So we're taking this idea of this Italian-inspired dish and bringing in a lot of these Japanese products to still try to kind of replicate all of those things that we would associate with like prosciutto, but without the pork aspect of it.
But I love that. I love that you guys are all, as a whole, kind of evolving the culinary scene out here. With that, where are you eating when you're coming out here? Do you? Well, really, you have no time.
I mean,
you told us earlier. You get to work at 6 a.m. and are there until what?
You do
midnight?
have Sundays off.
I have Sundays off, and usually that that ends up being me cooking at home. But in general, I try to eat places that, because I don't have a lot of time, I try to eat places that I know I'm not, I know that I'm going to be happy with.
Yeah.
So that's really the big thing for me. So because my wife and I still live in Durham because of our the extent or the length of the lease on our place. So we'll be moving to Raleigh pretty soon. But living in Durham, I tend to gravitate back towards Matt Kelly restaurants.
Yeah.
And I go back to Mateo a lot to eat. I go to Mother's and Sons a lot to eat.
Yeah, I was going to say, you might have had Mother and Sons, of course, is an amazing Italian restaurant. And you're doing so much Italian flavors. Were there ever any brainstorming jam sessions together? I mean, the two restaurants are next door to each other, so the kitchens are very close. So were there ever just brainstorming jam sessions with Skinny, with Josh DeCarolis and you? And
yeah, absolutely. I would even while I was even while I was or I shouldn't say even, but while I was recipe testing a lot of stuff, I would bring it by for Josh to try or Nate, who's the chef de cuisine at Mateo as well. So those guys, I respect their opinions immensely. And so those guys were able to give me a lot of both positive and negative criticism on stuff that I was playing with.
Yeah.
That's awesome that you can workshop stuff with other chefs that are
yeah,
I mean, their opinion is legitimate.
Part of in a lot of growing up, and I don't mean as a kid growing up, but growing up in this industry, I was getting so much exposure to people who were secretive with what they were doing. Wylie was never. Wylie was very, very open with everything that he was doing, and that I respected very much. But so many other places were kind of no, I'm not giving this recipe out, or no, I'm not doing that. Wylie didn't care, partly because he also knew that it's all about the execution on a lot of what he was doing.
Good luck trying to fabricate this.
He'll give it to you in detail. Good luck trying to make it, but he'll give it to you in detail.
It's confidence too. He's I know I'm a good cook. So
and in the end, people who, I forget who said it, and it's not. I'm not literally quoting, but it's if you have a good idea, you share that good idea because you are a generator of good ideas.
Yeah.
It's not like you get the one thing that's going to make you successful and you can't share that with people. You come from a culture of giving and sharing, like an Italian American household that I grew up in.
Living in Los Angeles, and you spent time there as well. Did you ever get the one where you'd say something about, man, it'd be a cool TV show, or this would be a good idea for a movie, and you'd get some idiot at the table say, don't say it out loud.
Yeah.
This table has ears. Okay, I'm not going to produce a movie, so...
But I'd like to see this movie get made.
It, so let me say it real loud, and then hopefully some douchebag stealing my ideas goes and makes a great movie. That said, the 3 Batman series by Christopher Nolan, that was my idea.
Well, anyway, listen, it doesn't matter because Instagram and Facebook or Alexa are always listening, so...
Exactly.
Yeah, and so it was it's awesome being here where there is such a community though of chefs that are sharing constantly.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely incredible. And we're sharing with each other and bouncing ideas off of each other and bouncing new techniques off of each other. And do I care if someone takes it and runs with it? No.
Well, what if you saw somebody else doing another
chicken Parm-Ramen?
Or not that exactly, but another Japanese Italian dish that was really well lauded.
Go for it.
Nice.
I think that's awesome because if nothing else, it's going to make my cuisine more approachable.
Yeah.
If more people are doing it.
Yeah, Matt, did you hear about that new podcast called the North Carolina Beverage and Food Podcast? Those dicks.
But it's true. Max is always of the opinion, maybe even more so than my New York competitive nature, but always if another podcast pops up that's food related, he's always no, great, more to the space, more driving people to what we do. So
I
you're of the same philosophy.
Of those few people that listen to our show, I'm kidding. We actually that's the crazy part is we were in Chow Chow. in Asheville, and it's very humbling. And I mean this not in any douchebaggery way, and it's actually the most humble way of saying it, is that many people came up to us throughout the time we were there saying, "Oh man, I listen to you all the time. I listen to your show." And I can walk through life not hearing that pretty often in general, because we're not like massively well known, but in a small circle that is our food and beverage community, it's so tight that if anyone was going to listen to us, that's where they would exist. And so it's humbling, it's gratifying, and it makes us realize why we should be doing this, because people should know what Tom Cuomo's doing at Papa Shogun, and you don't have an opportunity always to just go out there and talk to everybody and say, "Hey, did you guys figure out what I'm doing here and why this is cool and different?"
I've tried spinning a sign on the corner, but I just had people throwing dollar bills at me for whatever reason. I don't know why.
Yeah,
right,
it does reinforce it values like why we do this stuff. You know, it's like, oh yeah, people actually want to hear these stories. Not necessarily me running on and on about nonsense. They want to hear you say what it is, but I have to interject at some point.
No, and I mean, I'll just jump on the back of that. It's not easy to do this. It's not like we roll out of bed and then just like come up. There's scheduling, there's editing, there's a lot of production that goes in. So yeah, when you guys tell us, "Oh, hey, we listen," that really does feel good and keeps us moving forward. But I can't let you get out of here with asking, are you related to the governor of New York or the former governor of New York, Mario Cuomo?
And his son, the current governor,
exactly.
right, of Andrew? No.
Okay.
I mean, probably at some point all Cuomos are related because we're all from the same town in Italy.
Which town is that?
It'll be a small town. Yeah, exactly.
Town of Cuomo. Well, yeah, I'm a Trujillo, and it comes from the town of Trujillo in Spain. So there you go.
No, it'll be like the Naples area.
Okay.
Of Italy. So, and I'm sure at some point we all were related, and so I could probably trace it back. But no,
okay.
No, cousin Mario did not come over to the house for Christmas.
Damn.
Yeah, no. And then one more thing before you get out of here, we have to give you a Bestow Baked Good cake, baked especially for you. They're friends of our show, and every guest of the show walks away with something fantastic. This will be something that you and the wife and the child can all throw down and eat on a Sunday afternoon if you'd like. But make sure you go out to Bestow Baked Goods, currently in Fuquay Varina, but soon to be opening up in Holly Springs, right next door to the aforementioned Triangle Wine Company.
Listen, as we always say, when you're in Raleigh and you want something different and new and delicious, go to Papa Shogun. You will eat and drink very merrily.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks for listening to the NC F&B podcast. And if you've stuck with us this long, review us on iTunes, and remember, 5 stars are encouraged.